Welcome back, chess fans. Today we're exploring the top 5 chess traps that can catch your opponent off guard and give you a winning edge. Let's get started. Number 5 on our list is the legal trap, starting with pawn to e4 and pawn to e5. White develops with knight to f3, and black responds with knight to c6, a very standard opening setup. White then plays bishop to c4, while black chooses pawn to d6, strengthening the center. Next comes knight to c3, and black plays bishop to g4, pinning the knight on f3 to the queen. White answers with pawn to h3, challenging the bishop. The strongest reply for black is to capture on f3, but if the bishop retreats to h5, white gets the chance to spring the famous legal trap. White suddenly plays knight takes a5, seemingly ignoring the pin. If black becomes greedy and captures the queen with bishop takes d1, the trap is triggered. White immediately plays bishop to f7 check, forcing the king to move. The king cannot escape to d7 because that square is controlled by white's knight. Black's king usually goes to e7, and then comes the stunning finish. Knight to d5 checkmate. It's a beautiful and unexpected mate that many players never see coming. This is the classic legal trap. Trap number 4 is the Blackburne-Schilling gambit trap. The opening begins in a similar way. Pawn to a4, pawn to a5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4. But instead of playing pawn to d6, black surprises white with knight to d4, immediately setting a clever trap. This move often tempts white to capture the pawn with knight takes a5. If white falls for it, black quickly strikes with queen to g5, creating serious threats against both the knight and the pawn on g2. Now white faces a difficult decision. If they panic and try to protect the g2 pawn with pawn to g3, black simply captures the knight on e5, winning material. If white instead tries to save the knight by jumping to f7, it may look safe because the bishop on c4 appears to defend it. But the position is actually very dangerous. Black can then play queen to g2, attacking the rook. If white tries to protect the rook with rook to f1, black responds with queen to a forecheck, creating a powerful attack that is extremely hard to stop. Even if white decides to sacrifice the queen to survive, black's attack continues. And if white attempts to block with the bishop, black finishes the game with the sneaky move knight to f3 checkmate. The bishop cannot capture the knight because it is pinned to the queen, leading to a very elegant and memorable checkmate. Let's explore another scenario. What if white decides not to move the rook to f1? They might try to snatch more material, unaware of black's lurking threats. Then comes queen takes h1. White's only response is bishop to f1. Black follows up with queen to a forecheck, just like before, putting immense pressure. Soon the queen is ready to land on e2. If white tries bishop to e2, black responds with bishop to c5, creating an unstoppable checkmate. No matter what white does, the attack cannot be stopped. Here's a quick recap for those who haven't seen this position before. After knight to c3, followed by knight to f3 check, it's not checkmate immediately because the king still has f1 as an escape square. But then queen to h4 appears, threatening queen to f2, which would deliver checkmate. White is forced to respond, yet checkmate is inevitable shortly after. Coming in at number 3 is the elephant trap. It starts with pawn to d4, d5, followed by c4, entering the queen's gambit. Black declines with e6, white develops with knight to c3, black plays knight to f6, and then bishop to g5, pinning the knight to the queen. Black continues with knight to d7, reinforcing the pinned knight. When white captures the pawn, a very common move, black recaptures with a pawn, setting a trap. White might think they can grab another pawn safely, assuming the knight is pinned and cannot capture back. They may also believe the bishop still controls the knight, making the capture appear safe. But this is exactly what black wants. They're walking straight into the elephant trap. After white takes the pawn on d5, black immediately captures the knight. Even if white tries, bishop takes queen on d8, it's still fine for black. Next comes bishop to b4, and white's only legal move is queen to d2. After bishop takes d2, white's king must recapture. Then black's king takes on d8, and black emerges with a huge material advantage. This is the elephant trap in all its deceptive glory. Coming in at number 2 is the Lasker trap, a clever and often surprising line in the queen's gambit. The opening begins with pawn to d4, d5, followed by c4, and black responds aggressively with e5, entering the Albin counter gambit. If you haven't explored the Albin counter gambit yet, it's definitely worth adding to your repertoire. In this trap, white usually captures the pawn on e5, which seems natural. Black then pushes the d-pawn, supported by the queen, meaning any material sacrificed can often be recovered later. Now white may play e3, thinking they can safely exchange queens and maintain a solid center. But this is exactly what black is waiting for. Instead of exchanging, black plays bishop to b4 check, putting immediate pressure on white. The most common reply is bishop to d2, trying to block the check. Here's where the trap really springs to life. Black captures the pawn on e3, tempting white to capture the bishop, believing black has overextended. But after white takes, black responds with queen down the board, forcing white's king to recapture. Even if white captures with a pawn, they end up significantly behind in material. The trap continues. If white takes the bishop on b4, black pushes pawn takes f2 check, forcing the king to move to e2. Then comes the sneaky but critical move. Pawn captures on g1, promoting to a knight and delivering check. At this stage, white has very few options. If the king moves away from the queen, black can capture it immediately. If the king retreats to e1, black plays queen to h4 check, forcing white's king into d2, a precarious position. From here, knight to c6 comes into play, bringing yet another attacker into the mix. Although there's no instant checkmate, black has an overwhelming attack and a massive material advantage. And as a fun bonus, you now have 3 knights on the board, which is a rare and exciting tactical achievement in chess. This is the brilliance and danger of the Lasker trap, a line where careful calculation and aggression combine to punish even small inaccuracies. Coming in at number 1 is the England Gambit trap, a sneaky and aggressive opening that starts with pawn to d4, pawn to e5. Yes, it's a legitimate and very playable line. If you haven't experimented with it yet, it's definitely worth trying. White usually responds by capturing the pawn on e5, and black develops with knight to c6, immediately putting pressure on the pawn. White often tries to cling to the extra material, but that's where black's trap begins. Next, black plays queen to a7, developing naturally while keeping threats alive. If white continues with bishop to f4, aiming to maintain the pawn, black strikes with queen to b4 check, simultaneously attacking the bishop on f4. White typically retreats the bishop, trying to attack the queen in the process, but black simply captures the pawn on b2. Here's where the critical misstep usually occurs. Bishop to c3. White thinks it's a strong move, attacking the queen while assuming the rook on a 1 is safe because of the knight on b1. Unfortunately for white, this move walks straight into bishop to b4, and suddenly they're in serious trouble. If white tries to block with the queen, black captures with the bishop. After the queen recaptures, black can move in for checkmate. If white decides to capture with the knight instead, black simply takes the rook on a 1. Even if the knight jumps back into play for some counterplay in the center, black still emerges with a free rook and a dominant position. White does have a few alternatives, but none of them work well. Instead of capturing with the queen, black can take with the bishop. Even if white responds with knight takes b4, there's still no safe follow-up. White may try to save the rook on a 1, but moves like knight to c3 fail instantly, as black's queen simply captures it. Even knight to a 3, attempting to defend the queen, doesn't work either. In this position, there's simply no way for white to keep the rook safe. What looks like a safe and reasonable move, bishop to c3, actually falls perfectly into the trap. It's a line that's very easy to set up, extremely tempting for an unsuspecting opponent, and very satisfying to execute. That's the England Gambit trap in all its cunning brilliance. Hope you enjoyed these top 5 chess traps and got some new strategies to level up your game. Smash that like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more tips. Comment your favorite trap or what you want to see next. Keep playing, keep winning,